It's another solo. And a lot of people, when I asked what you wanted to learn about, a lot of people said melatonin. Tell us about melatonin. And so I started to do what I thought was going to be a deep dive on melatonin and realized that there's no way I can do a deep dive on melatonin in one of these short solo episodes. So this is either going to be a multi-part episode, or I don't know. Suffice to say that melatonin, it is definitely one of the most fascinating compounds in the human body. So I'm calling this a melatonin exploration because, to be perfectly transparent with you, this is scratching the surface. I know I'm going to get comments and saying, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? You're all right. There are a million different facets to explore on melatonin. I'm just going to scratch the surface today. And if there's more interest, I'll talk about it some more. And there's actually definitely a few experts in the melatonin field that I'll be reaching out to. There's a few really good voices in this space. Dr. Frank Schallenberger is one of them. Dr. Thierry Hertog is another one. I remember him attending one of his lectures, and he talked about melatonin used topically to support hair growth. And that's not even part of this episode, but it's just one of the most fascinating compounds. It, like vitamin D, is a hormone in the body. And as such, it has wide-ranging effects. So we always think of melatonin as the sleep hormone. It is the darkness hormone for sure, whereas vitamin D is the light hormone or the daylight hormone. There is a lot of overlap between these two hormones. And there's a belief that there's some synergistic elements between the two of them. They kind of operate for sure like a seesaw. I'll talk about one of those in one of the points here, but there is so much to explore here. And as a matter of fact, the link that you're going to find in the show notes is to a massive paper that actually talks about melatonin and vitamin D. They end up talking a lot about melatonin because vitamin D was elucidated in a different paper. I got to tell you guys, I was fascinated with melatonin before. I'm even more fascinated now. So here is an exploration of melatonin. And these are science-backed, fascinating things you should know about melatonin. And I'm also going to mention a little bit about why the most effective melatonin supplements may be bioavailable plant-based versus synthetic. So we know that melatonin is exceptionally helpful for sleep, particularly in people with disrupted sleep due to old age, jet lag, shift work, circadian rhythm related sleep disorders, poor sleep quality, Alzheimer's. There's a big link with Alzheimer's, as well as in nocturnal hypertension. Nocturnal hypertension is really interesting because typically people's blood pressure drops during the night, even if they have high blood pressure during the day. But in some people, their blood pressure actually goes up at night. And it seems that there's some research around some applications of melatonin to support these people who have this nocturnal hypertension. So that's just a quick little overview. Melatonin is good to fall asleep, or versus people say melatonin is good to stay asleep. Well, it turns out that depending on the dosage and the timing of when you take your melatonin, it may actually have applications for both. And a lot of that is affected by how you process melatonin, which I talk about a little bit further along. So number one, I've done this as a list to make it easier for me to organize and to make it easier for you to follow along. And then if there's particular points you want me to dive into more in a future episode, then you can mention that and I will endeavor to do that. Okay. So here's number one. Number one, as I mentioned, melatonin is known as the darkness hormone. It is produced in the absence of ambient light, which is why us people in the health space and longevity space, blah, 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 we're always talking about avoid artificial blue light at night, at least a couple of hours before bed. And there is a direct relationship there. You do not want to be sleeping with ambient light shining into your room. So for those of you guys who live in big cities and have big city lights outside your apartment or your house, your windows, and you don't have blackout blinds, and I know guys that blackout blinds can be a big expense. If you can afford it and you own your own place, there's a company called Blackout that makes amazing blackout blinds or blackout shades. I can't remember. It's either shades or blinds. There's a correct term for them. You can self-install. They're relatively affordable compared to the traditional blackout blinds you would have, you would go out and buy. They are incredibly effective. Now, if you can't do that, it's okay. Buy a good sleep mask. A good sleep mask will go a long way to helping to mitigate the exposure to light. Ideally, you want to get rid of the light. I mean, I remember at one point people were talking about there's photoreceptors on the skin. So even if you're wearing a sleep mask, you can only block so much. Let's not make ourselves crazy. Let's avoid light in the room. If you need to have night lights, use red night lights. You can buy really cheap ones on Amazon. It's really no investment there, and they're very effective. Oh, and if you have to work on screens at night, I'm going to give you a few little hacks as I go along here. Obviously, you can use blue blockers. You can use a program on your computer to change the backlight to red, but that's going to make it very hard to work. I'm telling you now. Mitolux just came out with a new panel that has a firelight setting. And so you can put it on this firelight and it will offset your exposure to the artificial blue light from your screens. It's also really important at night to try and use lights that light from the floor up instead of from the ceiling down, because from the ceiling down obviously is going to mimic kind of sunlight to your brain. So mitigate blue light before bed. Notable thing as well is that melatonin is also produced in plants and animals. So everybody gets it. And all of these forms in plants and in animals are bioidentical to human melatonin. Cool, huh? Now, most of the supplements out there are synthetic, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It still looks like melatonin, but it may not act the same as melatonin. Number 2, it's produced and secreted by the pineal gland. And from there, it's released into the bloodstream and cerebrospinal fluid. Fun fact, I didn't actually realize this myself, is that the pineal gland is located, even though it's part of the brain, it's located outside the blood-brain barrier. Who knew? Really interesting. Number 3, melatonin is also produced in the gut by enterochromaffin cells. And they produce, hang on to your shorts here, 400 times more melatonin than the pineal gland. The role of this gut melatonin, still not fully understood, although it does not appear to be regulated by light-dark cycles, unless there's a pineal gut axis, which is not really fully elucidated yet, but definitely possible. Now, that said, the release of gut melatonin does seem to affect gut motility. It can also stimulate the regeneration of epithelial cells, as well as have antioxidant effects on the lining of the GI tract. So gut health seems to be also bound to this production of gut melatonin. Number 4, this is another one of these fun facts. Babies do not produce their own melatonin until they're 3 months of age. And so breastfed babies get it from mother's milk. So for bottle-fed babies, that's an interesting point. I don't know that you would want to give melatonin to an infant. That's a conversation to have with your pediatrician. But after 3 months of age, they're making their own melatonin. Number 5, human levels start to decline by the time we're through our 20s, and they keep declining until our 50s. So I had read in one of the studies that I looked at, and I don't know if I kept the reference to that one, but I'd read that in our kind of 20 to 50-year-old range, we generally maintain 0.3 milligrams of melatonin in plasma levels. And after 50, that drops to 0.1 milligrams. So that's a real argument for people over the age of 50 to supplement with 0.3 milligrams of melatonin, maybe a little bit more per night. And we're going to talk about dosing and timing again a little bit later on. Number 6, melatonin produced by the pineal gland is believed to be affected, not positively, negatively, by calcification of that pineal gland. Now, another interesting little point here is that epitalon, or the pineal gland bioregulator, seems to be able to either reverse or circumvent this, as it has been shown to restore and normalize melatonin production, particularly in elderly people. So if anybody's got a calcified pineal gland, it would be an elderly person. And in those people, the pineal gland bioregulator, the synthetic form being called epitalon, has been shown to normalize those melatonin levels. It can also work in younger people. I've seen it do real wonders for people's sleep in their 40s, 50s, 60s. The thing with the pineal gland bioregulator is it will be most helpful if you need it, or most noticeable for sleep if you need it for sleep. It's good for lots of other stuff, but that's not what this episode's about. Now, number 6, there is some evidence that vitamin D and melatonin may work synergistically in the skin. How cool is that? In the skin, melatonin acts as an antioxidant to mitigate damaging effects of UV light. So it's actually protective to the skin. topically. Dr. Thierry Hertog, I know, was using melatonin topically on the skin. I will tell you this. I once took melatonin, synthetic melatonin, put it in the palm of my hand, mixed it up with some cream and put it on my face. And it would appear that I used too much because the next morning I had a heck of a time getting out of bed. So it's very powerful and it's definitely bioavailable through the skin. Number 7, there are melatonin receptors throughout the body in tissues and organs that help to regulate each one's own circadian clock. Let's say that again. When the pineal gland releases melatonin, it goes out into the circulation, and there are receptors for that melatonin all over the body, in almost every organ, in every tissue. And we know that every tissue and organ has its own circadian clock. It's doing different things at different times. If you've ever studied traditional Chinese medicine, they have a clock that shows what organs are working to restore themselves at every hour of the clock through the night. So, for example, I think that the liver work is happening around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So they will often say somebody who consistently wakes up at 2 or 3 in the morning usually is having a liver issue. So again, not an expert in that area, but that is a really interesting little piece of information from a medical tradition older than ours. Number 8, melatonin is under active research for its anti-cancer properties. This is why researchers believe that the disruption of circadian rhythm, and hence melatonin, due to nighttime light exposure, may be a contributing factor in the development, promotion, and progression of cancers. You've probably all heard by now that people who work shift work are at much higher risk of certain types of cancers. And there may be a relationship here. Right? We also know, going back to the pineal gland, that epitalon, or the pineal gland bioregulator, has immune benefits and also has anti-tumor benefits. Is it possible that those benefits are linked to its effect on melatonin? Or it could be independent. We don't know, but melatonin definitely plays a role in cancer. There's interesting cancer research demonstrating that the supraphysiologic dosages, so now we're talking about 50 milligrams a day up to, in some cases, 200 milligrams a day. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and do this, but I'm just saying there's some studies and some research and some people applying those types of dosages that have been positively impactful when treating cancer. And in one of the studies I saw, they were doing part of it intramuscularly, part of it orally. Really interesting stuff. There are 2 people I know, and there's lots more, but 2 of the people that I know who use it in cancer. Well, one is Dr. Frank Schallenberger, and there are many others. And also Dr. John Laurent, he has a company called Mitozen. He wrote a really great book on melatonin called Melatonin, the Miracle Molecule. And that's a really big, deep dive into melatonin. And he uses melatonin in very creative ways, in very high dosages, but gets really great results with his clients. So if you're interested in this, you might want to check those 2 guys out. Number 9. Melatonin is not just a sleep hormone. It has as we're talking about here, it is also shown that it is a cell protector affecting immunomodulation, antioxidant processes. It's actually more powerful than vitamin E and vitamin C. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit, as well as the maintenance and production of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So this affects oxygen carrying capacity of the blood, infection fighting, and blood clotting. And then melatonin also acts as a mitochondrial regulator. It seems that the mitochondria can make their own melatonin, where it acts to probably mop up reactive oxygen species. Chris Masterjohn recently sent out, I'm recording this on July 9th. So last week, or just a few days ago, Chris Masterjohn released an article on the role of melatonin in mitochondria, and it is fascinating. I definitely encourage you to check that out. Now, number 10, as an antioxidant, melatonin has been shown to scavenge over 10 different reactive oxygen species and nitrogen species with its metabolites versus other antioxidants that at best can quench just a few reactive oxygen species. So mitochondria have now been shown to be able to produce their own melatonin independently of circadian cycle. It actually seems to be in response to certain types of stress, and it is speculated to aid in the reactive oxygen species because mitochondria are so busy making energy that they produce a lot of ROS, which is reactive oxygen species. So melatonin might actually be there to help to mop up some of that damage. And then given that melatonin levels decline with advancing age, it follows that restoring melatonin may help to support physiological regeneration. I didn't see in the paper much information about what happens to cellular melatonin production in older age. We know that the pineal gland produces less. There's still a lot of things that have to be kind of clarified in the relationship between the melatonin that's produced by the pineal gland, the melatonin that's produced in mitochondria, the melatonin that's produced in the gut. Do they interact? Are they interchangeable? Does one move to the other if it's needed? Like, those connections are not really fully understood yet, but it's just really interesting that we're finding melatonin in all these areas, and it definitely points to how critical this hormone is for humans. Now, can you get melatonin from food? I said earlier, it's present in plants and it's present in animals. So from animals, very little. And from food, it's also, we're talking about microscopic amounts. So for example, tart cherries. You got people drinking tart cherry juice before bed because tart cherries have melatonin in them. So here's the bad news. You would need to consume 50 pounds of tart cherries in a day to hit the target dose of 0.3 milligrams. Now, I love tart cherries, but I can tell you that even I would struggle. Plus, the amount of sugar I'd be consuming would be pretty over the top. So although tart cherries may be helpful, just getting your melatonin from tart cherries is not practical. The other thing that's really interesting here is that the melatonin that we're getting, the phytomelatonin, that phytochemical we're getting from the plant, so that plant-based melatonin is coming also with other phytochemicals. And so, it's possible that it's not just the melatonin that's doing the work here. It's possible that it's that whole cohort that's actually working together to improve our own melatonin levels. Again, this is there's a lot of speculation here, but phytomelatonin, that's the name for the plant form of melatonin. But there is some evidence. And again, I came across some literature. I didn't keep those. I'll go looking for those links again. But there's evidence that phytomelatonin is huge degrees of magnitude more effective than synthetic melatonin, which is really interesting because they're the same, they look the same. So this is where a lot of researchers are saying it is very possible that that plant melatonin, the phytomelatonin, is also coming with other compounds. Does that remind you of anything? For those of you who've been listening to me talk about bioregulators, this is often what we say about the natural bioregulators versus the synthetic bioregulators. Although the synthetic bioregulators are definitely very effective, they don't act the same way as the natural ones. And in large part, we believe that that's because the natural ones come with a whole cohort of other amino acids and small proteins. And so it's possible that that cohort amplifies the effects of that little amino acid chain in the case of, let's say, a pineal gland bioregulator, or in the case of a plant-based melatonin, in the case of the phytomelatonin. I'm actually right now taking a plant-based melatonin. I'm taking a tiny amount, and I am loving it. I got to tell you, I'm using 0.3 milligrams, which is quite a low dose, and it is plenty for me. I'll put the reference to the brand in the show notes. The product is called Herbatonin, and the brand is Symphony Natural Health. So really great product. They have two forms. They have two doses. They have a 0.3 milligrams and as well as a 3 milligrams. So the 3 milligram, we'll talk about dosing later. I'll get to it in a minute. Now, number 12, although people worry about this, there is no scientific evidence to date currently that supplementing with melatonin will cause dependency to develop. Now, you could say as you get older, you need it more. So if you're taking it to top up your levels because your body's not making it and then you stop taking it, you're going to feel it. But it doesn't mean that if you're doing well with 0.3 milligrams, you're going to then need 0.4 or 0.5 or 1 milligram. There's nothing that's showing that. So by and large, supplementing with appropriate dosages of melatonin is pretty safe, or it's considered to be quite safe. And based on all this information, if we do indeed lose our melatonin production as we age, it's probably a critical piece of aging well. All right, number 13. this is actually getting to that point that I mentioned earlier, humans produce anywhere from zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.9 milligrams of melatonin per day. So that range is considered a physiologic dose. Anything above that would be considered a pharmacological dose. And then when you get into what I was talking about earlier for like cancer treatment, when we're getting to the 20, the 40, the 50, the 200 milligrams, we're now getting to super physiological doses. Okay. So that's kind of like a nomenclature thing. It seems that for most people, not all people, 0.3 milligrams seems to be the sweet spot. So if you're thinking of trying it out, that may be a really great place to start. Number 14. Did you know that melatonin lowers body temperature during sleep? I didn't actually know that. I knew that our body temperature had to drop during sleep, but I didn't realize that melatonin plays a role in this. Okay, we're going to start wrapping up because I like to try to keep these episodes kind of half an hour-ish, and we still have a few more minutes. Now, when should you take melatonin? So that's a really interesting question. And it depends. It depends on you. So first of all, for sleep onset, you probably want to take it a good 60 to 90 minutes before you're going to go to bed. I'm going to remind you that exposure to blue light, blue artificial light, is going to suppress your own melatonin production. It's going to work against that melatonin that you're taking. So by all means, if you're going to really focus on your sleep, which we should all be doing, you want to be using blue blockers and or avoiding screens that hour and a half, if you can, 2 hours before bed. Start with 0.3 milligrams if that's where you want to start, and try it at 60 to 90 minutes before bedtime. And that will help, or it should help, with sleep onset. For people who are struggling to stay asleep, they may want to take their melatonin closer to bedtime. But this will vary to some degree with your genetics. There's an enzyme, or there's a gene that regulates an enzyme called CYP1A2, CYP1A2, and it regulates how fast we break down melatonin. Now, some of us break it down faster than others. How would you know that? Well, you could get your genetics done. Or number two, it's the same gene that breaks down caffeine. So if you're one of those people that struggle, that you drink a cup of coffee and you're like got the jitters and it keeps you up at night and the whole 9 yards, you might be what's called a slow metabolizer of caffeine, which would make you a slow metabolizer of melatonin. So that would mean that you want to take immediate release melatonin. You want to take it a good hour and a half or so before you go to bed, because it's going to take a while before it's going to actually take effect. Now, if you're one of those people that can drink coffee till the cows come home and it doesn't keep you up and it doesn't give you the jitters and you just get nothing but benefits from your caffeine, then you're probably a fast metabolizer of caffeine, which would make you a fast metabolizer of melatonin. In that case, you might want to take your melatonin maybe right before bed. But if you also want help with it to try to keep you asleep, you may take a higher dose. Or if you wake up in the middle of the night, you could try taking another baby dose right then without turning on the lights, using your red light if you have to see if it helps to put you back to sleep and keep you down through the night. So there's a fair amount of experimentation that's involved here, but start low and slow, as we do with so many things, and find your way and see what makes you feel better. You know you're doing too much if you can't get out of bed in the morning, you have like a melatonin hangover the next day, so you're just pushing through, you're just pushing through mud the next day. You can't get yourself going. That might be a sign that you're using too much melatonin. So also, people will often use higher doses when they're trying to reset their circadian rhythm when they're traveling across time zones. That would be a time to use maybe like the 3 milligram dose that these guys sell. So the Symphony Health, the Herbatonin comes in 3 milligrams, and it also comes in 0.3 milligrams. So pay attention. I took the 3 milligram ones. I mean, it took me out. But the problem is it took me out for a really long time because I'm a relatively slow metabolizer of melatonin. All right. So I just talked about how much you should take. So it's going to vary from person to person. Start low and slow. There are use case scenarios for very high doses. There were a lot of studies and a lot of discussion around the pandemic where higher doses of melatonin seem to be very helpful for people. It seemed to be helpful in suppressing that cytokine storm. Obviously, it's hard to talk freely about that stuff, but if you go digging around and you do a search in PubMed under melatonin and COVID-19, you will see a bunch of research pop up. And it was really interesting stuff. Now, are there interactions with other medications? Yes. Definitely there are. Any medication that's going to affect that CYP1A2 gene or enzyme is going to have an impact on how you process melatonin. In particular, there's an antidepressant called fluvoxamine, which suppresses the activity of CYP1A2, which normally degrades melatonin. So that's going to have an impact. But it can also interact with certain blood thinners, certain blood sugar lowering medication, some blood pressure lowering medication, and quite a long list of drugs. So if you're on medications, you might want to check with your doctor first. But really, if you're taking medication, you want to make sure that the melatonin is not somehow going to impact that medication. And you're going to want to make sure that the medication is not going to impact the way that you process your melatonin as well. So both of those are true. That's about it. I will say that in this paper, if you guys want to take a look at it, there's all these different sections on the different aspects of health that have been found to be impacted by melatonin. And I'm telling you guys, it is so wide ranging. There's stuff in there like fertility, people with headaches and migraines. There seems to be a link there. Gut issues, neurodegenerative disease, ADHD, all kinds of cognitive imbalances, multiple sclerosis, like autoimmune disease. Like it is wide ranging. So does this mean that you need to run out and buy melatonin? Well, it may mean that you may want to consider looking into it a little bit deeper for yourself. Definitely, if you're over the age of 50, I would say that there is some benefit to thinking about using some melatonin. One of the side effects that some people report is lucid dreams, so very vivid dreams on melatonin. So that can be a situation where you're just taking maybe a little bit too much. But I would also encourage everybody to try one of these next two things that I've talked about in the episode here. One is the pineal gland bioregulator. And I would say that the best form to try to start with would be the natural form. So that would be, it's called endolutin, but you can get around the crazy names. You can go to a company in the UK called Profound Health. So it's profound-health.com. And if you use code NATN15, I believe is the code, you'll save 15% off your purchase. And they sell a brand called Nature's Marvels. And you would just buy the pineal gland bioregulator from the Nature's Marvels brand. You would use 2 capsules a day for anywhere from 10 to 30 days. If it's your first time using it in the box, there's enough for 10 days. So if you buy 3 boxes, that'll do your 30 days. They give you a discount for buying 3 boxes. And you might want to see if that has an impact on your sleep. I've gotten incredibly good feedback from people on this. So something to think about. Or you might want to try this herbal melatonin by this company, Symphony Natural Health. The website, I believe, is called Feminescence, and the product is called Herbatonin. And if I can get a discount code for you guys, I will by the time this episode publishes. But if not, I'm still really encourage you to check it out. It's a really, really great product. And if you're already using synthetic melatonin, I'd be really interested to know, did you try the herbal melatonin and did you find that it acted differently? Because there's definitely some interesting evidence that says you may need a lot less of the herbal version than you do of the synthetic version for better effect. So that's just an invitation to do your own N-of-1 experimentation. Obviously, if you're wearing any kind of wearable, that's also going to give you some feedback on impact on your deep sleep, impact on your HRV, that's your heart rate variability, any impact on sleep onset or sleep duration, you name it, you're going to get that information from whatever wearable you're using. So that's it for melatonin. Hopefully for now anyway. Hopefully you found this as fascinating as I did. I'm going to keep reading up on this stuff. So if you want me to do a deeper dive on melatonin, let me know. I'm happy to do it. If not, I'm going to be running around looking for experts who want to talk to me about melatonin, because I think it's a fascinating compound and there's lots to be learned about how we can use it to improve our health and longevity and health span. So thank you so much for joining me today. I always appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you next time.